I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
Poetry, it's ceremonial language that taps on your heart and says, okay, let's pay attention here.
That's three-term U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo on this, the first in our three-part poetry series.
So my work came about out of a need for healing. I mean, justice is part of that.
We discussed the native poets who inspired her, the importance of history and place in her writing, and her new book, Girl Warrior.
That's some of the most subtle kindness, perhaps, is to look at somebody and see them. Say, okay, you have a story, and here we are in this moment, so I honor you.
All coming right up.
It's easy to know you want to make a change in your life, but it is hard to actually do it. How to Be a Better Human from TED is a podcast for when self-help feels too daunting or just not for you. I'm Chris Duffy, the host of How to Be a Better Human, and trust me, I do not have it all figured out. But join me as I talk to experts about actually attainable ways we can try to improve our lives. Whether it's facing fears, setting boundaries, cleaning your house, or all sorts of other topics. Find How to Be a Better Human wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, it's Jacob Lewis, executive producer of No Small Endeavor. My icon? Lee C. Camp. I get to see his days up close and personal. Studio in the morning, writing over lunch, live event before the ink dries. If I lived in his shoes for a day, I'd be begging for a nap. Our icons run hot, so the fuel's got to keep up. That's why I reach for Kachava. Like the icons we love, I need nourishment that moves with me wherever the day goes. First off, Kachava is delicious. More milkshake than chalky health drink. I'm a chocolate guy. 2 scoops, cold water, oat milk, a couple ice cubes. Sometimes I even put a splash of iced coffee, and I'm out the door. 30 seconds, and I feel clear, focused, and full for hours. It's got all the good stuff your mind and body crave for whole body health. With every 2 scoops, you get 85 plus superfoods, nutrients, and plant-based ingredients. You can try Kachava risk-free with their Love It guarantee. Thousands of rave reviews agree you're going to love it. So, make your day iconic with Kachava. Go to Kachava.com and use code NSE for 15% off your next order. That's Kachava, Kachava.com, code NSE for 15% off.
I love the autumn. I just spent a weekend with a friend cutting and splitting firewood for the winter. With the days getting shorter, the summer chores fewer, and the fall colors on their way, everything seems to be slowing down. Just delightful. And then in the midst of all those creature comforts are yet another, our new Bowl and Branch signature sheets. Yes, those Bowl and Branch signature sheets are buttery soft, breathable to sleep in, and made with the highest quality 100% organic cotton in durable designs, and come with a 30-night worry-free guarantee. We are indeed having no worries and a great deal of delight with our new Bowl and Branch sheets. So start building your sanctuary of comfort this fall with Bowl and Branch. For a limited time, get 20% off your first set of sheets plus free shipping at bowlandbranch.com/NSE. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/NSE to save 20% and unlock free shipping. Exclusions apply. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Years ago, I found myself particularly grieved by yet another new war and what I understood to be the fear and falsehoods that were fueling that so-called preemptive war. One day, especially heavy, I was biking in South Nashville and came upon a weeping willow. Its own saddened branches bowed down to the earth, heavy with the griefs of the creation. And thus I was reminded, yes, we must contend with our crises and challenges, with the devastation of war, political unrest, and oppressions by the mighty. Yet none of these, alas, are new. However, the specifics of the challenges of our own day pose hitherto unknown challenges, such as the continued rapid unfolding of climate change and its attendant devastation, or the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, its proponents professing utopian-like goods, while we also wonder regarding the potential devastation it might leave in its wake. What can it mean to live a good life in the midst of such seasons? Grappling with that question, I remembered a line from my friend and NSC friend, poet Chris Wiman. In his beautiful memoir, My Bright Abyss, he asks the question, what is poetry's role when the world is burning? Poetry, at such a time as this? Some might be tempted to answer simply nothing. But maybe not only not nothing, maybe something necessary, something deeply human, maybe something indispensable. In part one of this series, we were pleased to welcome Joy Harjo, distinguished poet, musician, and 3-term U.S. Poet Laureate, the second poet in history to hold this prestigious role for a third term. Joy is a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, and much of her work draws on First Nation storytelling and histories. Her extensive literary achievements include 10 celebrated poetry collections, notably Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, shortlisted by the Griffin Prize, and In Mad Love and War, winner of an American Book Award. Joy has been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame and awarded a National Humanities Medal. Joy, we're very honored to have you with us today.
Well, it's good to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. How much you began to formulate an answer perhaps to that role of how you think of your work as a poet, giving us a response to the challenging times in which we find ourselves?
That's my whole next book of poetry.
Well, it's good timing then.
Well, maybe the world is always burning. Certainly right now we're at quite a crisis of a magnitude I don't know. I mean, I think of Krakatoa and that eruption and plague and all those things and dictators that rise up and fall down. But we're in quite a mess right now. I mean, when I'm with Native people, we say, well, we've been through this before and we'll still be here after. But I think the work of poets, I mean, you think about how is the world constructed and what kind of world are we in? We seem to be okay, and then here comes hatred, and here comes dictators, and here comes this onrush of struggle and suffering. Poets, philosophers, people fixing cars, whatever, we all, think about why are we here? What does it mean? And when we construct this world essentially with our dreams, and our dreams get formulated into our thoughts, and our thoughts into words, and then into action. And poetry demands another kind of language. It's not everyday language. It's ceremonial language of ritual, language that not just taps you on the shoulder, but maybe taps on your heart or at the edge of your soul and says, okay, let's pay attention here. It shifts us into deeper perceptions of connection. So the role of poets is to, we're witness, all of us are witness to history, but poets bring that refined and tough language to the attention, to the oral, A-U-R-A-L, to the oral attention of the people, because, language is sound, it's resonance.
You've spoken about how this is very personal for you. At one point you said, in a strange kind of sense, writing frees me to believe in myself, to be able to speak, to have voice, because I have to. It is my survival. What's that looked like for you, for your writing, your poetry to be your survival?
I don't know when I said that. That was probably a little ways back. I think when I first began writing, I began writing as part of Native rights movements. I had no plan to become a poet or a writer. When I started writing poetry, I was a studio art major and involved in Native rights movements. And I didn't do it consciously and say, well, I'm going to be a poet now. I started writing out of, after hearing these eloquent speeches and responses to community people being questioned by Kennecott copper, coal companies of extraction who were going on to native lands in the Southwest, not far from Albuquerque in New Mexico, and the native communities would call in native students because we were getting educated just to witness or to listen or to help. And to hear those people speak and how they made connections between the land, between history and what being a human being meant to them, and how it was connected, inspired me or just took hold in me. And I started writing poetry out of that impetus. So my work came about out of a need for healing. I mean, justice is part of that. Justice for anyone becomes a kind of healing.
Elsewhere, I read that you said the importance of you becoming a student at the University of New Mexico had been very significant, that you began to understand how much language, putting together words, can make a difference in terms of transformation of nations, transformation of lives, and so on. What do you remember about that moment in which you began to see the power of words in that way?
It was hearing Native poets for the first time. I mean, I grew up in Tulsa, and we could see the work of Native artists everywhere, including like my aunt, whose painting is behind me, Aunt Lois Harjo, and others in the community. I mean, we were aware. We knew the artists, knew their names. But poetry was something else. Teachers were terrified of it. They approached it, as something they had to do. And if I put myself back again as a student, in 8th grade or 6th grade, and the teacher said, okay, here are songs on paper. Let's listen to them. And then if they read them, that would have been so much more magical than saying, we have to do this. We're mandated by the state to do this section on poetry. So I'm going to labor through it and get through it as quick as I can, But we didn't read Native poets. In state history, we all had a required Oklahoma state history. Native history was only like the first few paragraphs, and yet it's everything here in this state. So I began hearing Native poets. I think the first Native poet I met was Simon Ortiz from Acoma Pueblo, and what struck me was that he wrote poems that were about our lives, and in the cadence of the English that we spoke in our contemporary young, Native communities. Although he was older, he was a kind of a different generation than me. But that opened the door. Leslie Silko, she was writing her novel, Ceremony, when I first met her. She was living in Alaska and came to visit. And we became close and had quite a correspondence for a while. But her poetry, she was a wonderful poet, as well as short story writer and novelist. But that poetry was in her novels, just like, Toni Morrison, one of the finest novelists of our time. Her novels are poetry. I mean, there's an attention to language. And Jim Welch, Blackfoot writer, who is known for his novels, but he wrote one of the best American books of poetry called Riding the Earth Boy 40. And when I heard them, and then I was going through these experiences as a young Native woman and as being part of different gatherings of people telling stories and organizing, that I started writing poetry.
You mentioned that in your state-mandated Oklahoma history, there was very little attention given to Native poets or Native history. Were you aware as a child of much of that history or much of that overlooked history or that literary tradition, or was this something that you only came to learn as you began hearing these poets in this time in college?
When I was growing up, my father was Muskogee Creek and my mother was Cherokee. I don't know how much. Her mother grew up in a Cherokee family, but they were not enrolled. But what I grew up hearing, I think from both of them, was Native history. And my father especially was very pronounced in his pride and in his family. He comes from quite a historically important family. And so I would hear some of that. Later, I found out that we're related to Alexander Posey, a major American poet who is also Muskogee Creek. Distantly related.
Yeah.
I didn't know as much as I know. I went digging around. I think it was a different age then. My father was born in 1930. And that was, I think of it as an age of chaos, especially for Native communities coming out of removal, in the 1800s and trying to reconstruct and everything that went on. And it was our generation that brought everything up again and began organizing. But it was very clear to my father about the injustices going on, and it was heartbreaking. I think that's what he died of more than anything, was a broken heart. But he was still rowdy. Even with
You've written in your book Crazy Brave about some of the struggles of your father and about his alcoholism. And how do you see his alcoholism related to that kind of broken heart that you just discussed?
Well, what I like, and I can't remember who said it, but years ago, some of us were sitting around, younger Native people, with an older person, and we were talking about addiction and alcohol, which is, it affects everybody, not just Natives. But he was saying, well, people are just looking for a vision. And that's always stayed with me. There is that nice little buzz at first that everybody kind of wants to ride, and then it feels good, and then the thought of going back into the real world gets a little bit difficult. I can read a new poem, actually.
Yeah, please.
It'll be in the new book, and I had it pulled right up here. It's called Overwhelm. There was a door between the men arguing and me in the small town hotel where I returned late to my room. Then they went quiet, which can be more dangerous. I became stealthy in my mind. Bad spirits find doorways in stupor. I used to seek lift from the overwhelm and drink. I'd ride over the meadow of doubt flowers to the field of miracles where anything was possible in the blur. I never drank alone. It was the circle that drew me from the haunting to the waters. We remembered songs that we thought we had forgotten, and we were beautiful beyond belief. The profane danced wildly with the sublime. How ridiculous now to think we were happy in the quick shelter we sought from truth. I now understand how a whole country can drink from the waters of illusion and go down, and how easy fury can turn to gunshots, then give way to torpor. I needed a respite from the story, then as in now. I counted the steps from midnight to home, to your arms. The dark skies of eternity were lit with small fires. They showed me the way.
As you think about that vision of escape from the torpor that you described there, and earlier you used the language of the tragedies of history and that they were heartbreaking, what are specific ways that that historical drama, trauma impacted your own childhood?
I think as a kid, you're just a kid. And your world, you assume that, that's just how people live. Like any kid. I think the perspective starts widening, or it can. It depends on your mindset. From child, it's natural. There's the perspective of infancy, which could be of eternity, more than we think, because we're fresh from that doorway, to the perspective when you're around 7 and you move out into the larger world and you start to see other circles of community and you make your own community with friends. I think that's when you start realizing, oh, I'm Native. Okay, this is this and this is that. Sometimes you torque yourself into ways to fit, or you get edgy in your ways of not fitting. And then when you reach adolescence, it's at a fever, this fever of perception. And I have a new book out in October called Girl Warrior. They're coming of age stories. And in one of the stories, I talk about adolescence. I talk about how there's a chrysalis period, and adolescence is case in point. You go from being a boy to a man or a young person to an adult. And that's quite a process. And I liken it to being in a chrysalis and going from being a caterpillar to a butterfly. And yet how we are in that now, perhaps as a country. We're in the gooey moment of chaotic where you're no longer a caterpillar, but you're not a butterfly yet. And you don't know how it might happen or what's going to happen. And so I think, too, as a kid, you move through time differently. When you get to my age, there's a huge shift. I love the perspective from here. So as a child growing up, certainly the history was there. There was the race riots that had happened in Tulsa. There was a lot of segregation. The world was black and white and Native. My community was mostly Native and white. There was a little bit of overlap, but I didn't really know about the race riot. I didn't really understand how we wound up there from Georgia or Alabama. They were realities that we crossed into. And then the word was, in our schools, it was all America and white America. We didn't read black writers either. We read mostly writers from England or from the Northeast. My idea of a poet was a old white guy declaiming in a raincoat. Even though there was Emily Dickinson, but even she was in a raincoat, in a country far away. Or there were daffodils in a field. Or it had nothing to do with me or my history or how poetry comes from history and place. And then I came to love Yeats, but not through what anybody was teaching in my education. My mother loved poetry. But, I came to poetry really through music, through song lyrics. But then I think now I would like to think that what was happening is the students were beginning to see that all of America, there's poets, all of us, all the cultures and their various streams of identity, we had become present in the classroom in a way that was not when I was a student in the 50s and then the early 60s. And then now it's within a few flicks of the wrist of a crazy man. It's undone by one person. By one person. He has support, obviously. But, no one is minding the store, so to speak.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Joy Harjo. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. We would be most appreciative if you would go to your favorite podcast app where you're listening right now and write up a glowing 5-star review of No Small Endeavor. Those reviews help extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world, and we'd be grateful for you taking 2 minutes to go out and do that for us. Coming up, Joy and I discuss the complexity of Muskogee history, democracy's roots in Native culture, and the importance of awe in a life well lived. It has been so delightful to see more and more listeners like you sign up for NSC Plus. Our growing community is made up of intelligent and thoughtful people looking for a holistic approach to human flourishing. Signing up for NSC Plus is also a way to support the show and the work we're doing, and in fact, we depend upon that kind of support. But in addition to supporting the show, you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, and the No Small Endeavor you've come to love will be completely ad-free. In fact, you won't even hear ads like this one. So go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus to become a member of our community today. Join for as little as $5 a month. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com, click on that red button that says Join NSC Plus to become a member today.
The detective said missing kids usually come home. What happens when they don't?
Based on a true story.
Police looking for John Gacy.
We discovered bodies. By the looks of it, they're younger men. The things he did to those kids.
He's sick.
The system failed these families.
Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Do you know how many there are?
Up to you to find out.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
I understand that you discovered there's a complexity about your own story in that your father was raised with a lot of wealth, and maybe it was your grandfather, great-great-grandfather, who owned the Harjo Oil Company, and that your father had actually been raised in a 21-room house.
Yeah.
But you'd only learned this later. So what was that discovery like, and how did you make sense of that?
Well, being Native, I mean, we've been so equated with the trauma story, or that all Natives are poor, or all Natives are this. Our stories are complex. Someone reminded of a story, they used to call her Creek Mary, who in the 1700s, a Muskogee woman who garnered a lot of power by marrying a trader and also garnering a lot of trade and being an asset to her community by, in a way, being a kind of a diplomat, a major force in the trade economy, which was what was primary in the Southeast at that time. So it didn't surprise me. I mean, I knew that there had been oil money. There's a story, and I've been collecting research. We've heard, of course, in a very big way culturally about the Osage and their story. But, the Muskogee people have a story too. Same thing with the oil companies. They would come in and kill off parents to gain guardianship. There's all those kinds of stories. So that my grandparents survived that. I mean, my great-grandfather became quite an interim principal chief, but he was very respected for his humbleness and his take and his studiedness on what was going on in our community, say in the 20s and the early 1900s, and was quite a respected person. He had the first car, and I just found out recently he had our Harjo Oil Company. And I wonder what happened to that. And other family members were sharecroppers, on my mother's side. My grandmother, who was a painter, also played saxophone in Indian Territory. I always say, put that in your images of Native people. We run the gamut. Our story as Muskogee people as a whole is very different than, say, the Lakota and Pine Ridge, which gets presented as the primary story of Native people. But we're not all Plains people. Our music, our culture is different. Like Pacific Northwest people, very different. You're dealing with water, other ways of getting food, a lot of salmon, etc. I mean, that all makes a difference for any community, not just anthropological studies of natives, but it works the same for Jewish New York City. How you bring food to the table. That's culture.
A moment ago, you spoke of companies of extraction, which of course is kind of classic colonialism. And I'd love to hear you share a little bit with us about how you began, I think in your book, In Mad Love and War, you began to think about those sorts of themes. How have you begun to process this sort of systemic reality of colonialism and the sorts of ways that such power can wield such devastation in its wake?
How does anybody process it? Really, I mean, it's really come to bear with this current administration allowing extraction and public lands and protected lands. I can remember hearing old people who were probably my age then saying, they're not going to stop until they take everything, but we'll still be here. And yet, I just don't want to believe. I can't. I have children, grandchildren, they're all our children. In the work I do and traveling, I meet a lot of young people, and see them and their hearts and what they're doing and the story they're bringing forth together. So I know it will go on, but at what cost to all of us? And it reminds me how much power one person can have. And that ultimately, each of us is a power source, every one of us. And so we have to figure out, what it is that we were put here to do, what we need to take care of, and develop that and go to work doing that.
When you think of exemplars who have withstood the overreach of power, who are some particular images or stories that you carry with you to fuel your own courage?
Stories of courage, I think it's everyday people. I still remember her, and I don't remember her name, but this young Navajo woman when I was a student. And I'd be working so hard, and I went to work, and I had a full load, and I had 2 kids, and pretty much on my own. And then I'd feel a little ragged, and then she would come into a meeting, and she was just well put together with, I think she had about 4 or 5 little children with her, all very well behaved, and she was like me, taking a full load. And I was just thinking, this is, what it takes. I honor what it would take for her to get up and cook and fix everything and get the kids ready and all the things that you have to do to make a family. So much so that before I stopped painting and switched my major to creative writing, I was going to start working on a series of women warriors, or warriors, period, because the people that you see in history books are usually those picked out not by the community. I think about who would the community pick? Who do we see that no one else sees? And those are people, sometimes they go through incredible hardship. Maybe the family knows and no one else knows, but then they manage to get their high school diploma, or they manage to make it through college. They manage despite having to take care of family members. And, there's all kinds of stories of people who have survived incredible things and nobody knows their story.
In your memoir, Crazy Brave, you say, I am 7 generations from Monawi, who with the rest of the Red Stick contingent fought Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in what is now known as Alabama. Our tribe was removed unlawfully from our homelands. 7 generations can live under one roof. That sense of time brings history close, within breathing distance. I call it ancestor time. Everything is a living being, even time, even words. That passage struck me with a particular poignance because I had read this right before going home to Alabama a month ago. And my grandparents lived in Dadeville, which is just very close by where the Battle of Horseshoe Bend happened. And I was raised in Talladega, which there was another battle with Andrew Jackson that is memorialized in a little historical marker there in downtown Talladega. And those 2 battles in Talladega and at Horseshoe Bend, where all of my people are from and where I was from, led, of course, to the displacement of your people on the Trail of Tears. And so having read that and then being home and making a special stop by the historical marker, I didn't know what to do with that other than to be aware of the sad and poignant way in which all of a sudden I found this connection with you. My heritage that profited off of the injustice to your heritage. Maybe my question is, I know you use this notion of story field, but maybe that seems like this sort of awareness that we're all a part of this shared story. We find ourselves at different places in the story, but it certainly draws us in a profound way, I think, to see one another's humanity, at least at a minimum, in a way that we might not otherwise.
Yeah, that's the complexity. And actually, I need to correct that in the book. I'm actually 6 generations. I really wanted it to be 7 because of the 7 generations, but it's not. It's 6 generations. And An American Sunrise, that book deals directly with that history and how Manahui and his family, he had different wives, and one family was totally killed at Horseshoe Bend, the women, the children. And I'm descended from Betsy Kozer. And he went on the trail. I have the emancipation records in that book, Bending Our Way. And it has a lot of those emancipation officer records about him and the Fish Pond people, Fish Pond Miko and his family traveling together from Talladega, Alabama, to on the Trail of Tears. And how Manahui liked to party. I mean, I like those human things, those human moments. But yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? I downloaded a biography of Andrew Jackson because I'm trying to figure something out, trying to understand people making people inhuman is the problem. So that you can't sit and talk and reason with each other and do so without an assumption that because of your culture or something like skin color or any of those things gives your opinion more value or makes you more of an authority or allows you to dominate. And that was the whole point of democracy in a way, and the way it was set up based on native cultures, the Iroquois and the Muskogee. It was about consensus and talking respectfully and listening. Listening is a big part of it, one-on-one and with groups. And then there's a breakdown. I think guns enter into it in a big way. Gun power, authority, assumption of authority based on religion, which has been a major destructor in the world, in terms of forcing your way onto other people, and so on. So that, yeah, I think about it. I think about the contradictions even of how we wind up here, you and me, or how I had a position at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and my husband and I went all over that part of the world. We found houses that some of our family members had lived in, and I remember going to what they said was Sequoia's cabin, the birthplace, not far from Knoxville, and going in there and discovered that Sequoia fought with Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. He fought against Muskogee Creek people. I think about what was going on then, people trying to survive, seeing the onslaught, not knowing, and other people, settlers coming in, many of them just trying to have a little piece of land or a home from a place where they had nothing or they were starving or no chance to have anything. And it's complex. But then I think the simplicity is that it would be like somebody in a spaceship coming in and saying, okay, you guys, we're going to tear down your churches or your places and you've got to live like us. And marching your kids into their schools and trying to make them like them. And yet here we are as two people, and that's important. And I think that's going back to the original question is where poetry comes in. To be able to sing together or to come to an understanding in a way that's beyond the small human mind.
Coming up is a short break, followed by our conversation on the long shadow of colonialism, the power of story, and the so-called ordinary people who have inspired joy.
Poetry has the power to connect our inner universe and the outer world. I'm Maggie Smith, poet and host of The Slowdown, a podcast from American Public Media. Each weekday, find time to take a breather from your to-do list, or doom scrolling for that matter, and take in a moment of reflection with a hand-picked poem. Listen to The Slowdown wherever you get podcasts.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for this day.
Every story you love, every invention that moves you, every idea you wished was yours, all began as nothing. Just a blank page with a blinking cursor, asking a simple question: what do you see? Great ideas start on Mac. Find out more on apple.com/Mac.
You mentioned religion and the role of religion, and certainly the destruction of the imposition of religion. What was your conception, experience of religion or God or faith as a child, and how has that developed or changed?
Oh man, I don't want to get in trouble talking about religion. Because I already have made enemies because of a few things I've said, like saying it's been a major cause of conflict and wars all over the world. If I go back to my earliest consciousness, and I can remember even being an infant, and even before, but to the earliest consciousness, for me, creation was being an incredible awe. And I found that outside, and I found it with the trees, and I found it usually not where human beings were, But I would see it in acts of kindness. I was, I think, deeply spiritually aware as a child, and I think maybe most children are. And then they get these ideas, or they learn things, and by the time you go to school, you're being perhaps mined in a way, going back to extraction economy or extraction. You're being mined, or your energy, or we start to lose track. I mean, little children are very creative. They don't judge, but they repeat what they see. And yet, I think people still come in as who they are, even as they come up through families. And my mom she called herself a Methodist. And my grandfather, Henry Marcy Harjo, the one who had the oil company, was, he and my grandmother, Katie Manawi, met at a boarding school. I think they had been orphaned after the trail, and church. I mean, that's all church. But, Muskogee people are very spiritually minded people, and I think they use then religion. They would make it fit the culture in a way, and you see that with the churches in the pueblos, where there's a native Catholicism and so on. And that's sort of what Muskogee people did, in the way that some of the Muskogee churches, where they arranged them somewhat like the ceremonial ground. So it's difficult to talk about. I mean, I got involved in an evangelical church because they were coming to the school and putting up notices about Vacation Bible School, and they had candy attached to it. So, of course, I was hooked and went. And I love the stories, and I love the innate spirituality of it. But what I had a very hard time with, and what eventually made me leave, was that this is the only way. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. And there was a lot of racism. I mean, there were people who wouldn't talk to me. I mean, I'm light-skinned, but there were people, because I was Native, would not sit with me, would not talk to me. But there were other people who were wonderful and treated me like a relative, and I just went there because it became a kind of refuge, the spirituality beneath all of the judgment and the racism that was there. So I left that, but really I'd like to think of, it's about, for me, my understanding, it's about this incredible love beyond belief. And then we humans, we're who we are. We get in here and make stories and get ourselves into a lot of trouble.
You said that in many cases you experience this all at the creation or in nature or moved by kindness. And I'm just wondering what particular pictures come to mind of nature or acts of kindness that especially move you in that way?
I've had incredible mentors in poetry and healing arts and in just family. And I think for somebody to give of themselves, I see that a lot in teachers. And I experienced it with teachers like in 6th grade where she didn't have to say anything. And I would come in and I was going through some rough stuff and she could see that. But there was something in her manner. She didn't have to, I didn't want her pity. I didn't need pity. But I just felt that she saw me. And to me, that's some of the most subtle kindness, perhaps, is to look at somebody and see them, even in a moment, even somebody on the street, is just to see them. Say, okay, you have a story, and you know, your story is just as important as mine, and here we are in this moment, so I honor you. And I honor that you're part of me in this story. I remember the writer Meredith Lesueur. I had 2 kids, and I met her not long before, and I was just starting to write poetry, and one day I get a cash in the mail, you know, that I absolutely needed for food, and there it was, and that's part of it. You know, it's just reaching out and to people, not necessarily people that you know. You don't have to know people. And I like watching it in children, innately in children. I've seen it in animals too.
So going back to what you said there about being seen and being seen as someone who has a story, I would love it as we close if you would do an experiment with us. And if you were to perhaps tell Joy Harjo's story in brief fashion, what would be the key moves or highlights of who you are?
Oh, man. I actually wrote something. I said that my mother was the sun and I was the moon. You know, and I was observant and fierce and dark, dark in my countenance. And then it took a lot of trials and dealing with dragons and struggles. And then at some point, there's a blooming with words and music, and they start to bloom. And that plant makes friends with plants all over the world. You know, something like that. That's not very good.
Well, I think that it's quite lovely. And I would say we're grateful for the way in which you have blossomed and bloomed with words, and the way in which you have sought to bear witness to history and bear witness to peace and bear witness to reconciliation.
I have one story actually about a plant. We think of animals, but it's a story in my book, Girl Warrior. And somebody gave me an African violet plant. I never had one, but it bloomed and bloomed and bloomed, and you have to water it a certain way. And I had to leave, and I left instructions for watering, but I didn't for that plant. And by the time I got back, the roots had started rotting. And I tried to make the plant come back, and it tried, but it always gave me flowers. It bloomed constantly. And so I told it, I said, I really miss your flowers. And right before it died, it gave me one flower. And I think, okay, I know it heard me. You know, I had that relationship, and life is in all things. You know, there's communication with all things, even planets. And our organs in our bodies, of course with each other. Sometimes there's communication, sometimes not, There's resonances, but that's a story. I think if the plant hardly had anything left, but it used some of its last energy to give me a flower. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the flowers that you've given us. Been talking to Joy Harjo, 3-term U.S. Poet Laureate. Thank you, Joy, so much for your work, and thank you so much for your time with us today.
Thank you.
Here's one closing take on today's interview. As you heard, Joy Harjo's people 6 generations ago were forcibly removed from their land by the United States federal government from the region in which my own people 4 or 5 generations ago took up residence. Her people's Muskogee language still lingers there. There's Cheehaw, the highest point in Alabama, a Muskogee word for high place. There's Talladega, my hometown, another Muskogee word meaning boundary. And still today, the most prominent historical marker in my hometown celebrates the defeat of Joy's people. Regarding the so-called Battle of Talladega, the marker reads, quote, "This short battle was a decisive victory for the young United States. Indians lost about 50, Jackson lost 20. In succeeding battles, Old Hickory broke," end quote. Here I'll replace the racial slur with the phrase Native American. Quote, "In succeeding battles, Old Hickory broke the Native Americans' power in the Southeast forever, permanently claiming this land for a greater nation," end quote. Describing all this to Joy, I used the word poignancy, this sadness infused with a bittersweet regret, something heartbreaking, with no simple solution. "Yes," said Joy, "it's complex, and yet here we are, 2 people, seeking to come to some understanding that transcends just one small human mind. These days, many prefer to ignore the heartbreaking poignancy, the complexity, yet it's not clear to me how willful blindness will ever serve us well." Amidst such complexity, Joy pointed us to 2 things we can do. First, bear witness. Put yourself in another's shoes, even if you have to imagine alien ships tearing down your home, abducting your children, and then bear witness. Second, practice awe at the beauty of sky and river and land and plants that give us one last bloom and blossom, and awe in simply seeing another human being, each carrying their own story. All this seems to be no small endeavor, and it's one closing take on our rich conversation with Joy Harjo. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Joy Harjo. Her new book, Girl Warrior, comes out October 7. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.
If you love No Small Endeavor, I suspect you will not want to miss joining us in Nashville for our Thanksgiving variety show on November 23. This year, we'll be joined by Sharon McMahon, #1 New York Times bestselling author and podcaster. Sharon is a longtime government and law educator who became known as America's government teacher during the 2020 election, when she went viral for breaking down complex topics with a steadfast commitment to the facts. It'll be a night of thoughtful conversation, moving music, and a room full of folks all in pursuit of no small endeavor. This year it's at the beautiful Skirmerhorn Symphony Center here in Nashville. We'll be joined by the Choir Room, Grammy award-winning artist Allison Russell, and a full band for an amazing night you will not want to miss. Mark your calendars for November 23, and don't wait. Go get your tickets now at the link in the show notes or at nosmallendeavor.com/events.